Hello, hello. Welcome everyone joining us for our session 2 of the Allbound Academy. We are starting to see people trickle in and getting set up here in this session. Thank you all for joining us today. We are expecting quite a few more people than last time, so we're just going to give them about a minute or two. And while we do that, I will probably do a few introductions. And so, a few things from my side. If you guys have any issues, if you're seeing that anybody has any issues joining us, please let us know. We know that last time there was a little bit of a technical difficulty to be able to come in, but that seems to have been fully fixed. So we are hoping that everybody's able to make it in seamlessly. All right, so as we get started, seeing people joining us from a lot of different places, and I actually don't think I mentioned this about myself, but for those who haven't met me yet, I'm Diana from the Rev Partners team. I work within the Allbound team, which is where we orchestrate inbound and outbound activities. I'm actually located all the way out in Colombia, so that's a little bit of a fun fact. Let me know if there's any technical issues on anybody's side, and let us know if you can hear us correctly. But as people come in, I want to introduce two folks to the conversation today. So first of all, we have Loriana. I'll give you the spot to introduce yourself in just a second, but super excited to have her as our subject matter expert today, talking about clay and how we're actually going to see hands-on how this transformation layer looks like within clay specifically, and maybe we'll be able to draw some comparisons to some of the other tools that you guys are using. And Corey is actually the what is it that they say in when you win a prize? Our happy winner. There you go. The Allbound Academy or Allbound strategy that we're going to be building within the Academy, and super excited to have him on. Give us a little bit of that context of how you guys or your decision makers should be thinking about some of these things, so that we can speak into the strategy that we're building for him. So, actually, as we get started, Loriana, do you want to come off mute and give us a little bit of an introduction on yourself? Oop, did we lose her? No? All right. Maybe we'll get started with you, Corey. Do you want to give us a tiny little intro on yourself? We'll go deeper into the company, but just about yourself for now.
Sure. Yeah. And you can hear me okay? Yeah.
Yes. Great.
Okay,
Thank you.
Yeah. So I've been in marketing and growth across digital health and hospitality for my whole career. And early adopter, startup guy, exited a few times. So super excited to be leaning in with this team. Rev Partners has been nothing but delightful engagement, because we also, we contract with you guys on another part of your business.
Yeah, perfect. Really excited to have you here today. And we'll definitely dive deeper into exactly what we're going to be doing and some of the work that we've already done as part of the homework that everybody was supposed to be doing for today. Loriana, are you with us? Do you want to come off mute and give a little bit of an introduction of yourself? No? Okay. We can.
We might.
There you go. Mm-hmm. Nope. Okay, we'll come back to that. All right, great. So we'll give an introduction later today. And guys, as everybody's coming in today, I just want to get started right away because we have so much to do. So let's go ahead and get started. Somebody in the background can help me maybe putting the rest of the folks off screen so that we can concentrate on the agenda for today, and we can go ahead and get started. So let's talk a little bit about what we will be discussing today. So first of all, I want to give you guys just a little bit of an introduction in regards to what we're what we talked about last week if anybody didn't get a chance to watch the recording. So I'll talk a little bit about that context. Also, really quickly, before we get into things, if you guys want to start dropping in the chat any of the like actual ICP definitions that you all came up with, we're going to be using that to frame a little bit of the conversation later today. So as we get started, please just 1, 2 sentences of your ICP definition. And this should be really like your top line ICP definition. How are you thinking about it? What are the data points that you can start drawing from the research that you did to be able to define what your ideal customer profile is? And this is obviously talking about companies. So let's see some examples in there. But as we go into those different examples, we're also going to be talking about today the framework, the enrichment. What does it look like to have a prospecting universe in your CRM? That's what we like to call it. And then Loriana is going to give us a little bit of a demo of Clay waterfall enrichment, how we actually see all of these things of enrichment, normalization, and segmentation within Clay. And then we'll go straight into the live company build, and we'll then talk about the deliverable for checkpoint 1. So let's go ahead and kick things off with a little bit of context from what we discussed last week. So last week we talked about the Allbound orchestration, and this is probably the biggest sort of like summary of how we see this engine working. So the idea of Allbound is that you have an engine that it is continuously monitoring signals, bringing in new contacts and companies based on all of these different signals that we're going to use almost as like sourcing channels. They're going to automatically go into a transformation layer where they're going to get enriched and segmented. They're going to get automatically prioritized. And then there's going to be an automated action layer that will deploy based on your own criteria of who's a good fit, what the right timing is, and what the specific signals actually, which specific signals actually matter for you, and then making the decisions around what that multi-channel outreach is actually going to look like. So this engine is continuously feeding top quality leads to your BDRs, SDRs, going into automated sequences, and even going into automated paid media campaigns or as needed. So this is the idea of what we're working through. As you can see, the first layer is the sourcing layer, but we're actually going to start with the transformation layer because I feel like this is the foundation of the entire rest of the orchestration and how we think about things. So please, if you haven't done your research yet, this is where we're going to start using it. I'll go into what we're going to be doing with it in just a moment at the end of the conversation. But let's go into the transformation layer. Okay, so when we talk about transformation, there's really 3 main topics to think through. The first one is enrichment. And by the way, this is also a little bit of a recap in regards to what we discussed briefly last time. But the first piece is the enrichment. So what are the data points at the company and contact level that we're going to be sourcing? So this is probably one of the points that is most familiar within the ecosystem. And in fact, last time or the first session that we had in the poll, we also talked about what are the different tools that you guys are using. Somebody mentioned Apollo or Clearbit or some different tools. Those tools tend to be exclusively enrichment tools. What they are doing is they are bringing specific data points into your CRM, or you're able to source them in a lot of different ways to be able to understand a little bit better who those companies and contacts are. But it tends to be mostly firmographic and technographic and demographic information. But we'll talk a little bit more about what that means in just a second. But another fundamental part of this transformation layer is also data normalization. So data normalization speaks into how do the different pieces of information that is given to us, either by a single source of enrichment, or even more importantly, if we're using multiple sources of enrichment, then get transformed in a way that you can actually use them within your CRM. And if you're a RevOps person or you have a RevOps person that is working through all of these things in your CRM, this is probably going to make them really happy. And then finally, categorization. So, yes, there's enrichment, and then you normalize the data. And then what happens with that data? How do you actually use it? How does this information help me understand who I want to talk to first, or what it has a bigger weight for me, or even how I speak to these different people? The way that I like to think about categorization is I don't source the same type of contacts for an enterprise level company versus an SMB company. I don't talk the same way to somebody who is in enterprise versus SMB. My buyer persona A probably has different pain points than my buyer persona B. And so this categorization is going to help us later better understand how we can do hyper personalized campaigns with the idea that all of this information is grouped so that we can segment properly each person. As a recap again, this is a little bit of what we talked last time, or what we really discussed in a little bit of detail last time. So when we're thinking about enrichment, I think about the company data points and then the contact data points. And I'm probably going to say this a ton of times today, but the idea is that you are standardizing the data points that you are sourcing every single time. I'm going to say that again, every single time. Why? Because a lot of the data that we're talking about from an enrichment point of view is later going to feed your scoring mechanism. And guess what? The score doesn't work if there is no data. So if you source one property for one company and not for another, and that ends up being one of your scoring levers, then that other company that doesn't have the information is not getting that additional score, not because it doesn't have it, but because you didn't source it. So that's a little bit of the really like the crux of why we need this information. So when I think about company enrichment, I think about three different data points. One is the firmographics. If you've never heard this word before, we're really just talking about industry size, what is the like revenue range, what are the things that are later going to help me understand exactly what type of company this is. Then I think about qualifiers. So qualifiers can be anything from if they use a specific tech stack because that's what I need, to do they have a location near a point or port in the United States, like very random qualifiers. But that is what we should think about. What are the things that the company really has to have from like a decision criteria point of view in order for us to serve them well? And then lastly, contextual information. So if they've been open a number of years, or if there's a specific size that we care about more than another, any other type of data points. Like, for example, there are times that I have done web scraping to figure out if a company has a shopping cart on their website, because that's a qualifier. But I've also then taken a look at the number of products that they have within that website, because that's contextual information that allows me to better understand if somebody's a higher fit than another. And when we talk about the contact enrichment, we're really just keeping it simple here, talking about two things: demographics, which is going to be job title, seniority, really any of the data points that we're going to be using for the demographic buyer persona segmentation, and then contextual. So as an example, if they have maybe like if they're part of a revenue community, if they have any certificates that we care about, if there's any interactions on LinkedIn that we care about. Also, one thing that is very important from a contextual point of view is networks. So one of the things that I think about when I think about contextual is like, are they already connected with one of my executive team members, or is there somebody in common that could potentially introduce us, et cetera, et cetera. That's a little bit about the contact and company enrichment. Now, let's talk a little bit about data normalization. So the normalization, as I was saying earlier, is really just the idea that the information that you're sourcing is really just going to be there's going to be very specific outputs. And guys, the bulk of you said that you're working with clay. This is especially important with clay, because what clay does is it uses different data sources, right? Like that's the whole idea of it. You have a multiple data providers that you're sourcing information from, which is why you get to a higher fill rate or more accurate and up to date information. But that also means that all of these different data sources are giving you the information in whatever format they wanted to give it to you. And that probably doesn't match what you have within your HubSpot instance. Some of the most, or your CRM in general, some of the most common ones are things like industry, revenue range, etc. Especially if you're feeding it straight into a default property within your CRM that has very specific inputs. You want to make sure that they have the exact same type of information and even like naming, a specific naming. When you go and you sync this over to your CRM, if the data is going to a drop down property and it doesn't have the exact value, the system will just error out and it won't sync any of your information back into HubSpot. So this is specifically important. And then obviously from a RevOps perspective, I mean, we love drop downs. This is how we are able to create standardized reporting. And so making sure that you're keeping that clean within your system so that later on when you start thinking about like, oh, what is the segment that has the highest open rate for my outbound campaigns, then you're able to truly go in and have a way to segment that information and be able to use it within um, yeah, within the CRM. So that's a little bit of normalization. Now, categorization. And by the way, I'm breezing through all of this because what I want to spend the most time in is the actual doing. So this is where I will finish the theory of it, and then we'll go straight into the demo and how we do it for Mentavi, which is the company that we're going to be working with. When it comes to categorization, the idea here is that you're creating buckets. Some of the most, I'm going to say, default categorization, like let's say you just don't have a really good idea of what your segmentation should look like. This is the most basic way I would suggest you do it. So the idea is that we're creating, again, that prospecting universe. And so if you're enriching your existing database, if you are doing any type of list building, even if you're sourcing this information exclusively from signals, the idea is that every single one of those records has information in those different properties, because that's ultimately what you're going to use to understand, okay, these are the companies and the contacts that I can actually reach out to, and this is how I'm going to be reaching out to them from these different segments. And that will separate that prospecting universe from any company in the system who hasn't been enriched because either you decided that they weren't going to be enriched because you didn't have enough credits, or simply because they don't fall within your prospecting universe, right? So when we talk about segmentation, what we really want to do at the company level is understand what are the buckets of different companies that really have different type of messaging or pain points that is relevant to them. And so again, when we think about like smaller companies versus bigger companies, it's very usual that at an SMB level, we would be probably reaching out to someone who's the CEO or the owner versus enterprise being more about director level or above, because it's going to be much harder to reach the CEO and maybe they're not the ones actually making the decision at that point. So this is the simplest way in which I can think or I can talk about segmentation. But if you're at a point that you already have things very well built out, I would also encourage you to think about how you can expand upon that segmentation. So for example, there are I also encourage things like, if you have a specific emphasis on healthcare, for example, healthcare is an industry that has very specific language, wording, um, uh, people to reach out to, etc. So within healthcare, I would also separate that from any other industry and again do something like an SMB, mid-market, and enterprise. And so just think about what that research told you about these different companies and how they need to be separated in order for the information to be relevant to each one of them. And then on that same vein, we talk about buyer personas. Now, when it comes to buyer personas and buying role is different, but I actually like merging the two within my buyer persona labeling. So, for example, at Rev Partners, we have what we call like revenue decision maker, sales decision maker. And then everybody else is either a champion or a contributor. So, think about what are those buckets of people, again, different pain points, if they tend to be the decision maker versus the champion, and how we're really going to be orchestrating that information for each one of them. All right, so that's it for the theory today. I hope that this is helpful. I want to go ahead and go straight into the demo within Clay so that we can see what this looks like a little bit in action. And this first part is actually going to focus on enrichment. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Loriana. Hopefully there's audio. Okay, great. Perfect. So let's go ahead and bring you on and have you do the demo if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself as well.
Yeah, there. So sorry about that. I don't know why my computer froze at the beginning. I'm Loriana. I'm a go-to-market engineer here at Rev Partners. I'm based in Argentina, and I have been working with Clay for over 2 years now, and I probably spent so many hours in Clay. So this is a very exciting topic for me to present. I will go ahead and share my screen. One sec. Okay. If we can make this full screen so they can see all the details. But basically today, I'm going to be walking through a Clay workbook that we are currently using that turns website visitors into leads. In my experience learning Clay, it can feel a little bit overwhelming at first, and it can get expensive fast if you don't know how to navigate the credit system. So today I'm just going to go over a little bit on credits, enrichments, and waterfalls so that you have the basics to start building. First, I want to do a little bit of a note or a disclaimer on why I'm going to have this single workbook that has the website visitors into 3 different tables. So the first one, it's where I receive the leads and where I receive them from the webhook, which I explain in a little bit. And then I exclude any people that I don't want to actually enrich. Then the second table will be specific for contacts, and the third one for companies. The reason I do this is, first of all, Clay has a column limit of 100 columns, and they can get, I know that sounds like a lot, like 100 columns, but if you have all of the information from contacts and companies in there, you will get to that limit pretty fast. And then it's also to kind of organize your workbook so that each table has one job and that it's easier to build and fix if anything happens. So starting at the first table, so each Clay table has different sources, right? So we can import from a CSV, you can import from your CRM. In this case, in our case, we're using HubSpot, or you can use webhooks to bring information from other tools. This specific webhook is pulling information from Vector, which is a website visitor identification tool. What that means is that if anyone visits our website, they will get pushed here, and then a new row with all of their details will show up, right? So for these contacts, we have email, name, LinkedIn URL, company, etc. The first thing that we're doing here, it's a formula, and I really encourage to use formulas so that because they're free. So what Diana was saying before on like normalization and having your data very clean, you can also use formulas to do that without spending credits. And then the send table data, it's a feature that sends any specific row to the next table or any table that you set it up to. But this is what I wanted to show specifically. So as you can see here, it says run condition not met. This is because this specific person works at Rev Partners, right? So we don't want them as a lead in HubSpot, so we are excluding them. And if you see here, there's this feature that Clay has, that's the run condition that I was mentioning. And I really use this for almost every single enrichment that I do. So basically how this works is you tell Clay, only do this enrichment if this condition is true, right? So in this specific example, you can see that we excluded them. So you're not spending credits or sending information that shouldn't be in there in the first place. So that's the first table where we receive all of the leads. The second table, we have the contact level enrichment. So we still have the same data from before. The first thing that we do here is a HubSpot lookup. So, or HubSpot or any CRM that you're really using. This is super important to do at the beginning before doing enrichments. First of all, because you do want to check if those already exist in HubSpot, so you already have that information, right? So in this specific table, I want to figure out if these people are buyer persona or not. But for these two people, I already have that information. So it wouldn't make sense for me to run everything again for those people because I was spending credits on something that I already have. And second of all, you would be, if you, in the future, not in the future, but later on when we send this information back to HubSpot, you may be creating duplicates if you don't do this. So I really, really recommend to checking against your CRM before pushing any information or enriching any information. Then we have a Clayagent in here, which is a super important feature in Clay, which is an AI web researcher agent. So basically, that sounds really complicated, but Clayagents, you can use them in Clay to give them a source. For example, in this case, I'm using the LinkedIn URL for the profile. I'm telling them to read the job title and the seniority and bring back a buyer persona, like Diana mentioned, right? So we have contributors and decision makers. This is just one example of what a Clayagent can be, but honestly, like here you put the prompt, but you can pretty much put everything as long as it's public information so that the Clayagent can get that for you. And they're usually not that expensive. You just have to check that the prompt is well done and then that you only test like here where I press save, I would only run on 10 rows so that you make sure that you're receiving the information that you want instead of spending all of those credits. So here the buyer persona is the most important column that we have because we only want to send people to the next table if they're a decision maker, right? Like these people are contributors, so we don't want them in our HubSpot. This is the same thing as the previous table, so we have the send table data to only be sent if they're decision makers. Lastly, we have the third table in here, which is where more of the heavier enrichment happens, and there's more examples of what Clay can actually do, right? The first thing I wanted to show, I will go over this in a sec, but I wanted to show this first. So when you see this little like tag on the top of the column, that means it's a waterfall. A waterfall is basically where you line up multiple providers, which Diana mentioned before. So you can see a clear example here on how it works, right? So first, Clay tries the first provider. If it does work, then if it finds data, then it stops there and it returns whatever it found at the end of the waterfall. But if it doesn't find anything, it goes to the next provider and so on. Like here, we have didn't found a result here, didn't find a result here, and it goes to the third one, right? So waterfalls are really great because you're managing all of the same, not the same, but enrichment providers for one specific data point that you want to find. And you will be much more likely to find a data point instead of just using one. And it will also be much more cheaper, right? Because in here, you can always make sure that the waterfall is, so the waterfall is cheapest to most expensive, right? So this is a technology stack provider that is cheaper than this one and so on, so that you can always make sure to get data points for as cheap as possible. Another thing, so there's a couple of waterfalls that we have for company revenue. So these two are super popular. So finding out what tech they use or their company revenue, and the most common one I use is for contacts for work emails, which it's at the end of the table, but basically I look for 10 tool providers or 10 email providers, and then it returns the results. Then this is another example of what Diana was mentioning for a company classification Clayagent. In this particular example, it's going to the company LinkedIn URL and company domain and trying to categorize those into whatever ICPs that you have in your strategy. So usually we divide the ICP by location or industry or revenue, most commonly revenue, so that whatever ICPs that you have, you can clearly see if these companies fit or not. This is an example of normalization that Diana was mentioning before. So this qualifying tech stack is all of the results we got from the tech waterfall, right? But here I just want to have one single type of data in my HubSpot so that, for example, in here, I only want to put Salesforce only. If they have like multiple HubSpot, Salesforce, like all of these would be a little bit messy to have in HubSpot. That's why I want to normalize it so that every single company has the same sort of results. Same thing with revenue. So for example, in here, there's just random specific numbers, but I just want them as ranges. So I just use Claygen that can give me the revenue range normalized, right? So that's a great thing that Clay has with the normalization. And I will show you a couple of more examples in a little bit. And then lastly, the ICP classification, which is similar to what the Claygen was doing, is just taking all of the information that we have and doing a final ICP classification. And as you can see here, some of things are ICP versus some of them that are out of ICP, so we wouldn't need those leads in our CRM. And lastly, here's the same lookups that I was doing for contacts, but I look for the company. I just want to make sure that they don't exist before creating one. So if they do exist, I just update them, or I create the ones that are missing. Here's the working of waterfall that I was just showing you, but for waterfalls, there are so many possibilities that you can do with so many different providers. So that's the company table. There's a couple of more things I want to show you. So this is the full flow, right? So the first table got the leads and filtered those out, the ones that worked on our company. The second was the buyer persona enrichment. And the third one was the ICP and more company enrichments, right? There's 3 tips that I wanted to give before moving on. So if you can see here on the top left, you see an auto run box, right? I always recommend, if you're starting with Clay, to turn this off, because this basically means that anytime a new lead is added, everything will start running. But if you're just building out and you have like thousands of leads, that could get very expensive very fast. Then there is this feature called Sculpture, which I would use if I would be learning how to use Clay again. Basically, it's like an assistant, AI assistant for Clay. I would highly recommend to use this if you're learning. It can help you create formulas or even write prompts for you for the Claygens, and it's actually pretty good there. It's in beta, but I think they're making it so much better every single month. And then lastly, yeah, like Diana said, the data normalization is crucial for your CRM to have the correct data that your team needs to, convert these leads. So you can do this by formulas you can see here, or you can do this using a cheap Claygen. But yeah, that's super important that you have that. I think the time for this is done, but I'm happy to respond questions in the end. But yeah, hope that was helpful. I will go back to stop sharing.
Great. Thank you so much. So there you guys have it, a little bit of an introduction in regards to Clay and how we use Clay for enrichment and normalization and even some of the categorization. Thank you so much, Loriana. I'm going to put you in the background while I go into some of the next steps and actually bring out Corey here for our next section of this conversation. So Corey, you and I met last week to talk a little bit about Mentavi. We did a little bit of research. There was a lot of context that you shared. Could you give give the team a little bit of a high-level overview of Mentavi, your goals, and maybe a tiny little bit of context in regards to where you are with outbound and lead generation?
Absolutely. Yeah. We're based in the US, headquartered in Michigan in the Midwest here. And we are a mental health company. We specialize in diagnostic evaluations as well as treatment. So we need patients to get a full diagnostic evaluation for ADHD, anxiety, depression, whatever it is that they're looking for help with before they move into either medical treatment or therapy. We offer the diagnostic evaluation in 50 states. Therapy and med treatment is in over 40 states. About half of the people that come to us are direct to consumer through like Google, Meta, Bing, some paid spend on that. The other half are through healthcare professional referrals. Many of these are people that we don't even know who's referring to us. We love it, but we don't know who they are. Because in the US, the healthcare marketing rules are very, very strict. We have to be extremely careful about how we capture information, enrich information, and what we do with that information. So we're working with experts like Rev Partners to help us really identify how we can do that, especially on the B2B side, really effectively. We have certain revenue goals right now. We've run about $19 million a year, but we want to grow 10%. And in order to do that, we really want to push that with business to business relationships. And that's why we're here. I did take that quiz about like my fluence, our company's fluency, and it's like a 2 out of 5.
Great. Okay. Well, I really appreciate that context. And guys, some of the reasons that we're talking today to Mentavi is because we are going to be focusing on the B2B side. They do have obviously already market fit. They've already been working a little bit on this journey of signals and outbound. They were working with a separate vendor, or they're still working with a separate vendor on the actual messaging and outbound. And that's the messaging is actually working. It's getting meetings booked. And now we're trying to figure out, okay, how does this engine work to be able to automatically serve this prioritized leads and then automate some of that outbound and et cetera. So there's already some trajectory that has happened. Also on the RevOps side, there's some standardization that is happening within HubSpot. They've already purchased Clay, so there's a lot of components here. So the first thing I'll do is I'll go ahead and share my screen to give you guys a little bit of a idea of what we discussed throughout this last week and how we answered the questions that we had as homework. And so you can see here a little bit of that context that Corey was just talking about, selling best to US-based practice owners and clinical directors. There is a lot of research that they have already done, and it looks like the fastest sales process or process in general is with smaller therapy practices. And so that's something to note maybe for later on scoring or the type of segmentation that we're going to be doing, but it's obviously not the only ones that they cater to. There are some prerequisites just to make sure that usually, and Corey, feel free to correct anything on here. I know that I've already shared this one with you, but we're going to be building live. But my understanding is that essentially, if they already have like a person in-house that can diagnose, usually the Mentavi framework of business is not as useful for those folks. And then there's also the higher education space that is of interest specifically within your business model. And so we also talked a little bit about like what makes sense in terms of a buyer persona. And this is just me like talking a little bit ahead because I know where all of these are going, but the questions are, who needs to be involved in the conversation in order to close the deal faster? How do we talk to them? How do we convince them? And even some of the information in regards to blockers or objections that might come up. And then we talked a little bit about competitors. The main competitor, or as I understand it, really is that somebody in-house is able to do a diagnosis. And so if that's the case, it's almost like a disqualifier in my mind. Maybe, I don't know, Corey, if that's the way that you think about it as well.
Exactly, yes.
Yeah. Okay, great. And then we also quickly touched base on the signal. So if there's any like referring out statement that is either on their website, on any LinkedIn post, or maybe even on communications that you've had in the past with any one of these different owners. Also seems like a new clinical leadership is a good space for us to start in terms of that being a signal. And then there's also like validation study engagement, where the company engages with any of the different or the study that you guys have available. And that's a pretty big reason for us to be able to reach out. And I won't go into too much detail here. I will go ahead and talk about this later. But when it comes to prioritization, is like what happens when you are reaching out. This is a little bit in regards to their current outreach method. So they already have messaging. They already know how to speak to these folks. Guys, this is an engine, and this is like sourcing information that is able to help us personalize things. But at the end of the day, you do need to create your content, or at least give the system your rubric of how to create the content. And so it's very important that you either do some manual testing for your messaging, or you understand really well what those pain points and benefits are in order to be able to create actual pipeline from this automated outbound campaign specifically. All right. So this is the context, and these are the questions and answers that we came up with through this research process. So how are we going to be using some of this information? Well, first, I want to go back into Clay and show you guys a few things that I recommend. So when you're creating all of this context, there's a few pieces of recommendation that I have for you. I'm showing you right now a demo account, but essentially you can go into, if you have Clay, if you don't have Clay, there's surely some way in which you can do this. And actually, I also use a document, like a public facing document or a Notion link within some of my agents, so that the system has enough context to be able to really understand deeply the pain points and the benefits that I offer to my clients. And so in this case, the first thing, if you want to, this is actually not in the workbook. So this is, you know, extra bonus points if you want to do it after this conversation. But essentially, go into your Clay if you have it, or any other tool, and add context, company description, ICP, buyer persona. Clay does give you the option of just putting your information in here and auto-generating it for you. But if we think about Mentavi, for example, they have both B2C and B2B. And so if I were to just do this, my information might be mix between B2B and B2C, or it might just give me more on the B2C side. So I actually want to control that. And I went in and I created my own company description, ICP, and buyer persona. And you can do this later on, because today we're going to go into how we're building out this buyer personas within the workbook. But this is one recommendation. And then the other recommendation that I have within Clay is to use Clayagents and functions. And so we're talking about standardizing the outputs and making sure that that information is fully standardized within your system, and et cetera. This is probably the best way to go about it. So let's talk about any one of these different Clayagents. Essentially, what you can do is those Clayagents or web scrapers or categorizations or anything that you're building within an AI functionality within Clay, you can actually make it an account Clayagent, which means you can build it and manage it directly from a centralized space, and then you can deploy it into different tables. And the reason why I suggest this is because when you create prompts separately in a lot of different tables, you're actually going to be sometimes the prompt it hasn't learned from what you've done in the past, and it doesn't self-improve. And so this is really the only way that we have right now in order to be able to have some level of feedback loops and standardization. So if you want to do this on your end, I highly suggest a buyer persona account Clayagent and an ICP categorization account Clayagent built within your Clay instance sooner rather than later. And what's really great about this Claygens is that you can actually test them out. So I can add here either an import from a table or a specific test case, and I can just give it the information in regards to, let's say, in this case, this is certainly a test, but I can give it information for a company to be able to test out my Claygens. This is not going to work because this is the contact level Claygen. So let me actually do it with myself. Oh, rep partners. Anyway, what I want to show you guys here is that it will actually give you the option of giving it feedback. So thumbs up or thumbs down, and you'll be able to get the information more updated within your Claygen itself. It's probably going to take a few minutes to do that, but you can also see here all of the feedback that you can build within it. And then lastly, functions is going to be the place where you can actually build specific ways of doing something. So for example, for us, we actually source tech stack, but I really only care about HubSpot and Salesforce. And so I have a specific way in which I source the tech stack, and then I segment out the information that I want for HubSpot and Salesforce. And then I have a drop-down property that gives me the specific HubSpot only, Salesforce only, or HubSpot and Salesforce. So it's like three or four different columns that I have to create. And so that's the type of function that you want to build out here. You can basically make an entire table here and make it a function so that you can rinse and repeat and make these things a lot more scalable. All right, so I know we only have about 15 minutes left, so I want to go into the workbook, and this is where we're going to be building out a lot of the things with Mentavi in mind. And so I already did a little bit of pre-work here, but Corey hasn't seen this, and we're going to get his feedback in real time. And so what we're going to be doing within the workbook, so if you guys want to pull it up, this is the enrichment and segmentation layer. And so if we think about the first point, which is the enrichment, I'm now sitting in that first slide that goes into the company enrichment. So what are the things that I think we should do in regards to company enrichment? And again, these are going to be the data points that we're going to be bringing in every single time or looking for every single time. So for firmographics, I definitely think we should bring in the industry, but I would actually recommend that we have a specific industry property if you don't already have one, that gives us the specific information in regards to this set of industries. And then I think we should have an organization type property that helps us understand if it's like a solo practice versus a group practice, smaller and higher end health system, university, etc. I would definitely recommend the headquarters location. I actually don't know how this works with some of the clinics if they have multiple branches, Corey. Is that something that you guys currently take into account?
You're correct that we can only serve folks in the United States.
Okay. And then if they have different branches, does it matter? Are you talking to one main headquarter or branch versus another? Or do you do different engagements with the different branches?
Sometimes it's with different branches. For example, the California university system, we have to have agreements with all the individual universities. And sometimes health systems, we have to have individual arrangements with different hospitals.
Okay, all right, makes sense. What about the organization type? Does this information seem relevant to you? Is there anything that you'd add or include?
Yeah, that's good. The amount of providers up to around 50 do also convert quite quickly. Like we can convert those in usually in less than 30 days.
Okay, perfect. Good to know. All right, so to be able to keep it simple, this is what I would suggest in terms of firmographics. And then I did leave a space here for the ICP, which is the segment that we're going to go into next. And then for qualifiers, this is where I would use Claygens to be able to search the web to understand if they're currently referring out, if I can find any of that information within their website or LinkedIn, if they have any telehealth capabilities, because that was also something that was of interest. And then lastly, if they have an in-house diagnostician. Now, this information, when we do web scraping, is an approximation to the context, right? Like it's not 100% of the time that we're going to get information in regards to all of these different items. and it's definitely not going to be 100% of the time that the information is going to be exactly what we want. So these are more going to be like multi-text properties within your CRM, where we can get the reasoning and the context of what I was able to find within the web. I also always add a disqualifier. So if I already know that they have an in-house diagnostician, then I probably won't continue the enrichment here, because these are folks that are not going to be using the service. There's also a note in regards to insurance only routing, and then non-US or like different items that we would use for disqualification. Now, on the buyer persona side, again, very, very simple. And this is just a little bit of brainstorming that I did prior to this conversation. So job title, seniority, location. I also thought maybe licenses or credentials might be of interest if they have a certain level of studies. I don't know if that's something that would be relevant. And then from a contextual point of view, maybe if they have a community membership, or if they've gone to a relevant conference that we care about that we can use as context later on. Are you seeing this, Corey? Anything that seems off or maybe missing?
No, this is great. Yeah, this is appropriate.
Okay, great. Well, the next step from here, guys, is going to be our ICP segmentation. And so this is going to be the homework, and I'll talk about how we end up doing this after or on next session. But essentially, this is the high level of what I'm thinking about right now. How do I group all of these different companies in a way that makes sense? So as an initial exercise, I was thinking we would break out clinical practices, maybe SMB versus mid-market. Maybe I'll add another one for enterprise. My question for Corey here would be, is there a big difference in regards to how we speak to a smaller clinical practice versus a bigger clinical practice, especially thinking about maybe health organizations that are much larger? Do we talk to the same people, and do we talk to them about the same things?
The decision maker or the financial buyer might be a little bit different as the practices grow, because there might be
Okay.
a clinical representative in the mid market, whereas in the SMBs they're usually the same person.
And when you say bigger, is there a huge difference between mid-market and enterprise? So if we think about mid-market versus enterprise, am I looking for to talk to different people, or is it, or once they hit the mid-market mark, they probably just have the same type of job titles I would be talking to in regards to decision making?
Yeah, that's an important point of clarification. From mid-market to enterprise, it does shift. Enterprise will then include, then we've got to talk to somebody in compliance, and then usually finance is a whole different thing. So
Got it.
it goes to like a buying committee. Sometimes there's some, it has to go through legal, but mid-market, they don't have those kinds of functions. Enterprise, absolutely they do.
Got it. Okay, perfect. So based on that feedback, essentially what I'll do is I'll have the three different sizes for clinical practice. So SMB, mid-market, and enterprise. And then I think we'll leave one ICP for higher education. I know that there's higher education on larger universities versus community colleges, but I would assume there's actually going to be the same type of owner for both. Would you agree with that, Corey?
That is true. Yeah, it doesn't
Okay.
matter if they've got 40,000 students or 4,000 students. It's usually one small, tiny clinic that's trying to help them all.
Exactly. Perfect. Okay. So my recommendation here is going to be ICP, clinical practice, SMB, mid-market, enterprise, and then a larger ICP for higher education that will group universities and colleges. So this is going to be my homework to fill out and show you guys next time. Corey, anything else you'd like to say or add before we turn it over into a Q&A?
No, this has been great. Thank you so much.
Great. Of course. All right. Perfect. So, guys, there you have it. That's what I am building with Corey for Mentavi Health, enrichment, data normalization, and categorization. We have about 7 minutes left. Would love to start going into a Q&A. And maybe if Loriana wants to come off mute, I'll bring her back on and we can have some clay specific questions. All right.
Yeah, I did answer some on the chat already, but I'm happy to go over more live if there's more.
Perfect. Nikki or Colt, do you guys have recommendations in regards to which questions we should be addressing? There seems to be a whole bunch of them. Okay. So I think I'm gonna maybe take a look at the ones that haven't been answered yet, but I'm trying to get a little bit of context. Okay, so I'm gonna go bottom to the top. When it comes to the normalization step, do you do it before data arrives into HubSpot or after? Loriana, do you want to take that?
Yeah, definitely before. So if you're using Clay in this specific case, definitely do it in there. You don't want to really send any messy data into HubSpot. And also it can get more complicated using workflows than just doing it in Claude directly. And there's also a couple, oh, I forgot to show this, but there's a couple of normalization tools in Clay that are for free. So you don't really need to spend any credits on that are native from Clay. So I would highly recommend using those instead of sending bad data to HubSpot.
Yeah, agreed. I was actually having a conversation yesterday with somebody asking me, like, why wouldn't you just do this within HubSpot? And there are things that we can do within HubSpot. And even now, actually, on not the next session, but the following, we're going to have somebody from HubSpot come in and show us a lot of the things that you can do within HubSpot. The thing I don't like about it is that I source a lot of information, and within Clay, I'm able to just exclude a whole bunch of these people out. And
Yeah.
if I bring it into HubSpot, then I'm going into a situation where I'm having to delete them instead of just
Yeah.
not sending them. So, okay, great. Let's talk about the programs that we use to scrape websites. So I actually understand this a little bit more from a like AI functionality point of view. And so I'll just answer this one by saying Clay itself has a Claygent tool that what it does is you can use the different LLMs and different models. It actually gives you the option on which one you can use directly within the Claygent feature that you build these tables with. So if you haven't, again, if you haven't gone through like an AI like academy or course or whatever, definitely recommend that, because different models, just from an AI perspective, different models will actually work best for different things, like content versus web scraping versus etc. When I have really complex ICPs or categorization that I'm doing that is like scraping the web and also categorizing, I personally prefer Claude or Anthropic, and you can connect your own into your Clay instance to use Claude credits. I honestly don't really think it makes a lot of sense to do it from a cost perspective. But if you have great rates, then great, you can use that. And then like OpenAI is really good for content, etc. So I think that's how I would answer that
Yeah.
question.
Yeah,
Right?
one
Okay.
thing on there, someone
Mhm,
was asking about these models as well.
mhm.
I think overall, I have seen with go-to-market engineers or like people overall using Clay, at the end, there's a lot of personal preference and like how do you prefer the outputs versus like OpenAI versus using the native Clay models. The example Diana was giving, Claude is very expensive on Clay directly. So if you do have your own API kit, that's always recommended so that you can save a lot of credits as well.
Yeah. Okay, great. Next question is, if I want revenue details, what best can be done to get the details? So there's actually specific. Okay, so the way that Clay works specifically is it has a lot of different data providers, and data providers specialize in different things. Like, for example, HG Insights has a lot of really great information in regards to like enterprise level companies and revenue and etc. And then companies like built with have information in regards to tech stack. And so there's actually a default waterfall within Clay that you can use to get revenue information that, based on my experience, has been pretty accurate. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Loriana.
Yeah, I think it's pretty accurate. Also, if you're searching for example, if you open a people table and you just want to find people within a certain company revenue, you can also do that, or companies based on company revenue, and that's already included in the list that they give you. But I think the waterfall that Diana was mentioning is the one that I shared live on our workbook. I think works pretty well.
Perfect. All right. Last question I'll go into here because we're 1 minute out. I'll go into, would you recommend using qualifier and contextual info for categorization, strictly focus on firmographics and contact info? So actually the way that I would do categorization is take into account some of the core information from the firmographics and the qualifiers. So for me, when it comes to the categorization of the ICP and the buyer persona, I think about having pre-qualified companies and contacts brought into the system. And so when we talk about this qualifier data points, what you're really doing is excluding out anybody who is not going to be your ICP. So I do a mix of firmographics and qualifiers. Great. Guys, so we are at time. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'll do my best to do a recap all over the Slack channel. Please share with us. We want to see what you're doing. We want to give you feedback. Thank you for joining us in this journey. Next week, we will have a corporate GTME straight from Clay coming in and talking to us about complex signals. So please stay tuned for that. And if anybody is having any trouble with the workbook or the research or the next steps on the ICP, let's use the Slack channel to collaborate. All right, great. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Great.
Nice job, everybody.